Welcome to the Table Podcast, where we discuss issues of God and culture, brought to you by Dallas Theological Seminary. Welcome to the Table Podcast, where we discuss issues of God and culture. My name is Kymberli Cook, and I am the Senior Administrator at the Hendricks Center. And today we're going to be talking about working moms. I am joined by Andi Thacker, one of the assistant professors of biblical counseling here at DTS, and also Christina Crenshaw. And she is a speaker, author, and lecturer at Baylor University in literature and leadership. And Christina is a mother of two. Andi is a mother of three, and I am a mother of one expecting another one. And so we all find ourselves in the situation of being working moms. Thus, it's a helpful conversation to have for the three of us. So to get started, I just want to give you both an opportunity to kind of tell us about yourself. How did you end up in the situation where you both have a professional life and a home life with kiddos and the fun that happens in the midst of that? Andi, let's start with you.
Okay. Well, I was a counselor long before I was a mom. So I started my career in 2006 after I finished my master's here and worked for several years and went on and got my doctorate at UNT. And then we had kids, or started having kids after I finished my doctorate. But during that time, I was working in private practice and also started adjuncting here and then went full-time about 5 years ago. So I still have a small private practice, but emphasis on the word small. Very, very small. Tiny. And then my husband and I have been married for almost 15 years, and we have three kids, like you said. Our daughter Emerson is 7, and our son Will is 5, and our littlest one is 2.
Oh, man. So, I have a 2-year-old, too. Wow.
Yeah, they're a lot.
They are. I haven't had 3 of them. So. Christina, what about you?
Yeah, so we have very similar narratives. I teach at Baylor University, and I was an assistant professor, and I did that. I was out in California at California Baptist University, and I was an assistant professor before I was a mother, and I knew that I was called to work. I knew even after I had children that was really what the Lord had for me. I don't think I quite anticipated how hard that would be to have these dual vocations, to be both a mother and an assistant professor. And I did that for a little bit until I had 2 within 20 months. And I really, spent some time praying about that and was feeling this nudge to step off the tenure track. But every time I sought advice on that, people said, don't do it, do what you have to do to make this work. But I think that was a real season of trusting the Lord with, my career and being obedient and purpose and calling. And so I think I've experienced both. I've experienced the full-time working mom, tenure track, 2 kids under 2. And then I've also experienced the stay at home for a year of maternity leave. And your sense of calling and purpose is really primarily in the home, and did some outside of the home contract work with an anti-human trafficking organization. But then slowly went back to work, started teaching part-time again. And then that developed into a full-time teaching position. So I feel like I have had the gamut, the spectrum of, working mom full-time, working mom a little bit, working mom part-time to back to full-time. So that's my story. Yeah.
Well, there are a lot of women like us in the workforce. According to the Department of Labor, we make up 47% of the workforce, so almost half. And interestingly, out of that 47%, or I guess not necessarily out of that 47%, 70% of mothers of children under 18 actually work. So 70% are in the workforce on some level. I was kind of floored to see that. I thought, goodness, there are a lot of women doing this. And out of that 70%, 40% are actually the breadwinners. So almost half of them are the ones who are providing the majority for their family. So there are a lot of working moms out there. But we do want to be sure to affirm, and like you said, Christina, you've been in a lot of the different seats, and we want to affirm those who do choose to stay at home with their children. It is absolutely work. It is not that they are not working on any level. And it's just that each set, those who stay at home and work at home, and those who choose to work outside of the home, each just face a different set of challenges. And so today we're really going to be focusing on the challenges facing the mothers who decide to work outside the home. So the first challenge that when I was trying to think through this, kind of the obvious one, it almost seems, that comes up is the pressure or judgment that sometimes still comes for women who who make that choice. And there are some who still argue, particularly it feels like in more conservative Christian circles, there are some who argue that women shouldn't be working outside the home and that their place is in the home. Andi, can you unpack a little bit about that? Like, what have you heard? Those arguments, has anything ever been said to you? Just what are your thoughts kind of generally to get us started?
Yeah. So, well, my background, I grew up in a home where my mom always worked, and my parents were business owners, so they had a lot of flexibility, but I didn't know anything but a mom who worked outside the home. And then when my husband and I married, his mom also always worked outside the home. When we began attending a more conservative church faith community is where I first encountered the thought process that women should make every effort to make the home their main priority by not working outside the home vocationally. And it was a little shocking because that's not what I was accustomed to. And I grew up in a religious background. So that's where I first encountered it. And I've noticed in my talk with friends and students that there's different subcultures and specifically different churches that have different belief systems and different pockets of the population where it's predominantly work-at-home moms, whereas other places it's work-outside-the-home moms. And so I think the setting that a woman finds themselves in as far as their main community really influences the messages that they hear. And I think from a biblical standpoint, there's a lot of disagreement between different groups on this subject, that women need to make every effort to be at home, and that's their place, and their kids really need them. And the thought process being that their kids would suffer if they're not the main one providing care the majority of the time, as opposed to the thought process of women can work outside the home and it's not going to be harmful at all. I have definitely felt that judgment, and even as a woman who works outside the home, I employ childcare services, and I've even had people on social media talk about that in reference to the choices we've made of how childcare workers are the one raising my kids. Or I know in passing one time I had a woman say, you just need to find someone good who can be the one that raises your kids. I'm like, oh I'm raising my kids. I'm just not there all the time. So I think it's hard enough to be a mom just because of the struggle of, am I doing it right? And is this what's best? But to have other women in the same foxhole with you throw darts at you makes it especially difficult. So I love what Brene Brown says about this, that as women, it's so important to support one another and create an atmosphere where we can be vulnerable when we have those days of, this did not go well. My toddler's running around naked, or and refuses to wear clothes, or my older child is struggling in school. That if we create an atmosphere of judgment, we lessen our ability to support each other from a community standpoint. And so I just think about from a biblical standpoint, it is so important that we rally around each other and be good community. And part of that comes from knowing, I think, that this is a stewardship issue. Whether or not you work inside the home or outside the home or both, it's stewardship of what's the best thing for my family in this season. And that may be different for somebody else, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Well, and really, Christ kind of gives us that example when he, in his interaction with Mary and Martha, when, he never actually corrects Martha for working. And ironically, the situation is almost a little flipped from what we're talking about. But what Jesus was upset about was what Martha trying to dictate what Mary should be doing, and kind of Jesus was saying, no, that how she has decided to follow me is good, and and that should be honored just how you're deciding to follow me. And the demoniac is another good example. The demoniac who wanted to follow Jesus, like everybody else was following Jesus, and Jesus said, no, I have something else for you to do. You need to stay here. And Peter, he when he found out that he was going to have a suffering death, and he said, well, but what about John? Like, what about this one? And Jesus says, that's none of your business. I have what I have called and the path I've laid out for these people. And Jesus never expressly says this, but and our role with one another and in the church is to support one another in what we feel like the Lord has called us to do. And to, get behind each other, and whether that's supporting a working mom, or supporting a woman who probably needs to work financially but really wants to stay at home. Maybe there's something the church can do there to support her, or stay-at-home moms. But any of the options are ones that we need to be getting behind instead of, like you said, just casting judgment. Yeah. Christina, have you had any kind of pressure in this area?
Oh, certainly. But it's interesting to bring in the other side of that coin. I've experienced judgment from more of an academic community when I decided to step off that tenure track. Everybody within my collegiate circle had an opinion on that. And I don't know that I felt a lot of support. And I think it went back to really discerning what was best for my family in this season, and knowing that every yes is a no to something else, and that there are consequences to really obeying what you feel like you're supposed to do in that season, and owning that, accepting that. But it was interesting to see that the judgment was really more on, you're not stewarding well everything that we've poured into you, or everything you've been called to do. And I think it was a moment of saying, I'm just pausing to rest and be obedient and to follow this other vocational call on my life. But that doesn't mean I've dropped it completely. There is a season to everything. And so being able to, to really walk out. And so the season has changed a little, but that doesn't mean that it won't come to fruition in another season. And I've experienced that even just in the 6 years of being a parent. I've seen that rhythm of, there's been some judgment on, whether I should work or shouldn't work. But within a faith community, I don't know that if I've experienced as much judgment on the shame of working, but I have experienced that on the flip side of you should be working. So it is interesting how your communities influence how you even filter, the world and your working worldview. So.
That's so true. And I'm working on a PhD right now, actually here, and everybody is obviously fantastic. But I have felt that pressure too, of I don't want to disappoint the people who have poured so much into me in an education sense, but as well as my job, and because I work for Dr. Bach, who is fantastic and incredibly flexible and very passionate about making working mom, like the life of a young working mom, work. And work is very flexible with me. And so then I feel that pressure of they're doing everything to try to help me. And it's still sometimes things can get a little hairy. And you're right. You feel pressure on both sides because you don't really want to fail or disappoint those who are really trying to help you have it all.
And I think some of that might be the expectation that we put on ourselves too. I mean, it's not to say that pressure from outside voices, that's not a real pressure, but sometimes I think it's almost managing our own expectations and saying, okay, but what am I called to do? Not what does this community say I should do, or what does that community say I should do, but what is best for me, for my family, and then the rest is just white noise. I haven't mastered that, but I know that is the right approach.
So let's dig into this idea of vocation a little bit. How is it different? How do you, is it, I'm trying to think. The only other type of double vocation I can think of is a pastor who works full time, and and he has that going on as well. And I don't know. Is that what it is? Is it a double vocation? Is it? I don't know. What do you all think, Andi? What do you think about that?
Part of me says yes, because so much goes into running a household, and I'm so thankful to be married to a man who helps a lot, and we're very much a team. This doesn't work if he's not fully on board. But I know that I probably take it upon myself that this is my main responsibility, and not necessarily the household, that, to organize kids' schedules and to do homework stuff and whatnot. But at the same time, he is an equal partner in that with me. And so in some ways, I would say he's also bivocational in that, because of the role he plays and his willingness to play that. But then there's part of me that's like, this is just what you do. You have a family, and that's just part of life.
That's how you grew up. So it's just everybody makes it work.
And I didn't train to be a mom. Even though I'm a counselor who works with children specifically, that doesn't seem to actually transfer to my own kids, unfortunately. I didn't train to do it, whereas I've trained to do this and spent a lot of time and effort getting to this place.
Yeah.
Christina, you've done some thought in the area of vocation, and I think even to a degree in this. What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, so I teach a class of vocational leadership at Baylor. It's typically sophomores, and they're learning to discern what it is they're called to do. And we sort of start with the premise that if you feel called to do something, that there must then be a caller, and kind of go from there. And I think vocation has several different definitions depending on who you're reading and listening to. But I think the most simplified version of that would be, what is it that sets your heart on fire, and where do you see a great need in the world? Specifically, where can you do this common good work? And so for me, I have found that it sets my heart on fire to teach and to work with students, and that I am not fully alive and I am not fully human if I am not walking out in that. And so there might be seasons of stepping back from that a little bit in order to invest in motherhood, or to invest, even when I was investing in my education, I couldn't teach nearly as much as I would like to because I was a student taking classes. So I think knowing that what I'm really called to do and sets my heart on fire is working with students, teaching, reading, researching, all that nerdy stuff. And I am more fully alive when I am bringing my gifts and callings to the table for the common good. And that doesn't make me less of a mom to do that. There might be times when motherhood calls me away from that calling a little bit more than other times. But I am very much still a mom if I'm standing in front of a group of students, or if I'm at the gym, or I'm getting my hair cut, or I'm recording a podcast. I don't cease to be a mother. And it's interesting how that's the one vocation that we call into question. Can you do these other things and still be a good mother? And there's not any other calling in life that we do that to. Nobody would ever really question, can you be a good wife and a good mother? I mean, there's tension, but we accept that those are dual narratives. So I think we're all bivocational or trivocational by nature, because we're all called to do so many different things. In my mind, I picture it more of a Venn diagram, and I like to limit how many Venn diagrams are layered on top of each other.
Life is a lot of Venn diagrams.
It's a lot of Venn diagrams, right? The idea of balance hasn't ever really set well with me, because life is not really balanced. But life is a Venn diagram, like so many overlapping spheres, and they touch each other, they influence each other. And so I think when we start to look at our vocations, like motherhood is a large part of what I do. It is arguably the most important thing I do, other than my marriage. My family is the most important thing I do, but it is not exclusively the only thing I do. And so looking at my vocation through that lens, I'm called to do multiple things. So,
I really like that, and I think I hadn't necessarily thought about myself having had the vocation of motherhood. Just my particular story was that I wasn't necessarily looking for it to happen, and I wasn't opposed. It was just something I don't know really what I think about that. It's kind of scary, kind of not. I don't know, but and so I wouldn't have considered that. But now having a child, it does. I would say, I would echo what you were saying as far as when I research and when I my area of my discipline is hopefully going to be theology, and so when I'm digging into the fathers and digging into those kinds of things, like I feel my heart on fire. I do that, and I feel a little bit, as cheesy as it is, of the chariots of fire thing. Like when I run, I feel God's pleasure. I feel like God's like, there it is. I've been waiting for you to see it. Right. And so there is a sense of vocation there. But I also have found that I feel that way with my daughter. And there are times where, whether probably when she's sleeping, because she's 2 and she's really tough right now, but even, there's times where she'll just lean over and put her head on my shoulder, or I'll see that she's just really struggling emotionally, like having, trying to deal with what's going on. And I feel a very similar heart on fire. I'm here to help you. And I feel God saying, yes, like this is part of what I have for you too, And so I hadn't ever really thought of it as 2 vocations, but I think there is one, your general vocation of seeking to serve the Lord and work toward human flourishing, and it happens in multiple areas.
Right.
So that's kind of one pressure that we see facing working moms. One challenge is pressure and judgment, maybe coming from the outside or even on yourselves as to whether you should even be doing this. Another pressure that I feel regularly is that of logistics. So just straight up trying to make it all happen. And I really would love to come back a little bit to the idea of the husbands, because I think that is key. But Anne-Marie Slaughter, who was in the political world and an author, wrote a pretty infamous article a while ago, though I was teased about saying it was a while ago because of my youth, in The Atlantic, on why, and it was called "Why Women Still Can't Have It All," and she was essentially making the argument that working moms are going to struggle and are essentially always behind everybody else in the workforce because they just have so many things pulling at them. And she hammers away at logistics and just what it takes to run a household. And like we've been recognizing, running a household in and of itself is its own job. And so what it takes to run a household as well as have an entire other profession. So Christina, would you just speak to the pressures of logistics? How have you all experienced them? What are the general ones that working moms experience? And then we'll hear from Andi.
Yeah. So I would say, I think it's fair to say, my husband would probably say this too if he were here, that we've been married 15 years and it has been a learning process. He grew up in a very conservative home. His mom stayed at home. That was his preference when he married me. But we know each other well enough to know, I went to grad school, and he's like, oh, I went to grad school again. And he's like, okay, here we go. So I think because he loves the Lord and he loves me, he's willing to be teachable in that. And in return, I have had to learn to say, okay, this is a season of deferring to you. So when we first had children, really felt like I needed to defer to him in order, for him to flourish. And then the past couple of years, I would say it's really been a place of him being a little bit more deferential to what I've been called to do so that I can make it up to Dallas for a fellowship, so I can make it here for a podcast or the other, various things that I've been called to steward. And so it's this place of, which is just such a picture of marriage in general, of, this is a season of getting behind you and supporting you, and this is a season of getting behind you and supporting you. And I don't know that in our 15 years that there's ever been one dominant narrative, that it really has been this place of support, defer with each other, and that's been a really healthy place for us. And, even though he's very much the leader in the home, it is just this place of mutual support that we need each other to do that. So I would say, going back to your question about, men and being a partner, I was raised actually in a single parent home mostly. My mom was a teacher. My parents divorced when I was really young, and she loved what she did, but she also worked out of necessity, and she had summers off. And if you're going to work, that's a really great profession to be a teacher. But I think sometimes women are in a position where they don't have a partner, and so it's great to pause and recognize sometimes women are working outside the home, but because they have to, and they really are doing it alone, and that is a hard hustle to do alone. That's a great place for the church to come in and say, how can I pick your kids up from carpool? How can I get them to church activities?
How can I get them? Certainly need.
They need it, right? Yeah. And then where we have husbands who are helpful, I think it's great and not at all chauvinistic or anti against rhetoric that is in support of women to say, my husband is a co-partner and I want to honor that. It doesn't make him any less masculine. It doesn't make me any less feminine. It doesn't, it's just this place of we co-labor together. He leads, but we co-labor together. So,
and there might come a point where I need to step back and allow and put some emphasis toward his vocation, just like he's been willing to do for we're in the middle of a PhD program right now, and my husband is carrying the team. But we've recognized, this is a time where he has intentionally said, it's, he has big things going on in his life and in his ministry as well. But right now, our family is kind of about making sure that you have this opportunity, and this is what we're trying to do. Yeah.
And it might shift after your PhD program,
absolutely.
Right? There may be something that the Lord calls him to that requires you to kind of get in a little bit more.
And that's kind of the dance of making it all happen. Yeah. Andi, what are your thoughts on logistics?
Well, I think about, as a parent and as I work with families, I always come back to our premise is we want to prepare our kids for the path, not the path for our kids. And one of the things that I think is so healthy for kids to learn early is that there are limits. We are limited and we are finite. And so to know that, because mommy works, you're not going to get to do more than X number of activities outside the house, and that will not be bad for you. And so they can learn it within the confines of our home. And I think that's something I always kind of come back to, especially if there's days that I feel guilty or bad, is that it's okay for them to learn that every choice that we make has a consequence, good or bad, and it's important to be able to role play those consequences. And so as I try to manage logistics and figure out schedules and when I'm going to travel and when my husband's going to travel, it's okay for our kids to see us say, we just have to draw this boundary, because hopefully they'll get to a place as adults where they can do that same thing and know that I can't do everything. Your dad can't do everything. And that's okay. We were never created to do it all.
And it's okay to bring in outside help. One of the most glorious seasons of my life was when I went back to teaching at Baylor, and we employed 2 of my former students who also went to our church to help with my kids. And they were more fun than I was, and they were newer than I was. My kids loved going to the zoo or to the museum in town with them. And there was a place of struggling, feeling like, oh, I should be doing that with my kids. But I do that with my kids. It's okay to allow other people to also do that with my kids. And really, those were sweet friendships that my kids still have with those girls. And one of them is now a mom, so it was good training for her. So I think bringing in community is really good for logistics as well.
And I feel like sometimes you're right. And I think sometimes we have, because we're just such an individualistic society, we think, well, we're supposed to just have it all together in the Cook household. And no, we don't need anybody. We don't, to have to ask anybody except maybe our parents quietly, like when things get really bad, we don't need any. And really, as far as like childhood development, you would definitely be able to speak to this. I feel like that it's helpful for kids to get loved on by other people and to be exposed to a variety of other, and just from an ecclesiological perspective, I feel like that allows, different people in the church to love on them and for them to come to understand and to love the church in a different way than you would if you were just kind of rolling along, you know, and doing everything on your own.
Yeah, absolutely. I think about your example, Christina, that you gave and what you just said, Kim. So our family, God put it together uniquely. Our first 2 kids are biological from us, and our 3rd child was adopted. And he came with a sweet little gift, and that is that he has a sister who's a year older than he is, and she was adopted by a single woman who lives near us. And to see her community, my son's sister's adoptive mom, her community loves her so well. They come around her, they help out, and she's equally as willing to ask for that help. And that sweet little girl is so blessed by the different people in her life that aren't necessarily blood relatives, but they're part of the body of Christ, and they're her family. And it has just broadened her. She is loved by so many, and it works the way the body of Christ should work. And so it's just such a beautiful picture.
So I'm hearing logistics as far it certainly requires support, especially if you're in a single situation. But even if you are married, it definitely usually necessitates the support of the husband and his willingness to kind of pull double duty as well. But I also think even for married couple, I know, and we're in a little bit of a season right now where things are crazy because I'm in my first trimester, which means I'm not feeling well, and we're in the middle of PhD and working and all of that. And so many people from the church people have just started bringing us food.
Awesome. That's so great.
Wept every single time because I was like, thank you. Because I just don't want to cook and I don't know what to do, but we need to eat food. and so even then, I think support is so necessary for people, to just, and really, I mean, I feel like that's life. Like that's, everybody could benefit from that every once in a while. But I also, so support, but I also hear boundaries. What you brought up, Andi, it's if you're going to be living this life and the logistics pressure is bearing down, part of it is just, here's where we say no. And we just kind of look at it and say, it'll be good for our kids, it's good for us. It's the only way we're going to make it. Here's where we say no, and that's a tough, that's so hard. I'm not very good at saying no.
And back to the Anne Marie Slaughter article, you really can't do it all, and particularly not all at one time, which I think was really what she wanted to emphasize in that article. And I think she's a dean at Princeton now. She worked in the political sphere, and she talked about how I was always able to manage these roles when I was in the academy, but as soon as I stepped out into politics, it got crazy quickly. But I think she had that epiphany, that revelation that, there's nothing inherently wrong with a woman working. It's good. It's great. But I think when we started to have that expectation that we can logistically do it all is when it quickly falls apart because it's not sustainable and it's not true. And there's nothing holy about thinking we can be an island unto ourselves, whether it islands us or our family. But you're right. We were created for the body of Christ. Let's invite them in, to this calling and journey.
So a third pressure I thought of when I was kind of thinking through this, and I think sometimes can be the most painful one, is what I'm going to call the heart tug. So that maternal part of yourself that just, here's a perfect example. The other day, my husband actually, he's a pastor, and so he has Fridays off, which is fantastic because he's able to spend an entire day with our 2-year-old. She's not in daycare on that day, and they call it Hattie Daddy Friday, and it's just fantastic.
Sweet.
And so they'll often come down and have lunch with me here on campus. And so recently, when it's gotten toward the end of lunch and we kind of were finishing up wherever we are, like at the restaurant, and all this, she started looking at me and saying, "Mommy, no go to work." And just saying it over and over, and there's just this part of me that dies on the inside, and I'm like, I know, and I don't want to, and but I do, and so I've started answering her well, Jesus has some other things for mommy to do today, you know, and so I'm, you know, we're all trying to follow Jesus. And so mommy needs to follow Jesus because he has some of these other things for me to do today, but I'm going to be home soon. You know, I'll see you and we'll play then, you know, that kind of thing. So how do you all manage the heart tug? Christina, let's start with you.
Yeah. I mean, I think I often refer to this as working mom guilt. I mean, being a mother, there is guilt induced no matter if you're inside the home, outside the home. You know, you're always wondering if I'm doing this to the best of my ability or even somebody else's ability, unfortunately. And that comparison trap can really get us into a rut. But I think for me, I don't know that there's any formula, but I think just really giving my kids vision for what it looks like to give attention to them and then also give attention to work. And using, now that they're in school, they're 4 and 6, I can use that as an analogy and say, you know, just like you're in school for a little bit these hours, you know, I'm at work for these hours, and then we come home, it's time to be together. And so that helps a little bit with rhythm. It is a little harder when they're 2, so I want to validate that. When they're little, I mean, just life is harder when they're 2, but much less logic. Logic's a lot harder when they're 2. But I think as they get older, kind of giving them vision for, you know, just like you're not in school all day or you're out for summers, you know, I'm not always working, helps them, I think, get vision for, you know, there are different places, you know, and I would not ever say this to my kids, but I say this to myself. I like them better if I've had a break from them.
Amen.
So I'm a better mother. And I don't know that this is true for every mom, but if we're really honest about it, we take breaks from our kids when we go to a workout class or we go on a date or we have a MOPS group even. I mean, we need breaks from our children to get refueled and refreshed. I may just need a little bit of a longer break. And I like my breaks to be, you know, walking out in this calling of teaching and researching and that sort of thing. So I think just it's okay to recognize, like, I feel a little guilty, but I need this break if I'm going to really be a great mom and flourish in that vocation, and then walk out in teaching, researching, and flourish in that vocation, then this is necessary. So I don't know if there's no way to, you know, negate the guilt, but I think you can abate the guilt by really saying, okay, but this is right, and talking to your kids as they get older. So, yeah.
Andi, how do you manage it?
A lot like you do, Christina. I always come back to I have to talk to myself, not listen to myself.
Oh, yeah.
Because if I listen to myself, what I'm saying is not always truthful or honoring to how God created me. And so I try to remind myself that first and foremost, just like you said, kind of the oxygen mask principle. If your air cabin pressure on an airplane loses oxygen, you put it on first, because if you're passed out, you can't help the kid next to you or the person who's acting like a kid. So I know as a mom, and this was hard for me for a while because I felt like I was kind of mad at God about this. He created me as an introvert, and so I recharge by being alone. And that seems like such a death sentence as a mother, especially little kids, because like the 2-year-old, if I go in the bathroom, here come his hands underneath the door, or the knock, mom, are you in there? And then realizing, kind of sensing him saying, no, Andi, I created you intentionally like this. This isn't a sin issue. This isn't a flaw. This is who you are. And it's okay to embrace that. And part of the self-care oxygen mask for me is working, because I feel so much wonderful things when I sit with students, when I teach, when I counsel. And so it's just, I'm a better mom because I get to exercise my gifts in different areas. And then I was really, really blessed this summer. I read the book by Bill Hendricks that talks about giftedness. And he talks about how God specifically gifts some women with a unique gift to really exercise that at home and be fulfilled at home, and they're gifted in that way, whereas other women aren't necessarily gifted in that way. And going outside the home is very appropriate for their gift exercising. And so that was such an affirmation to me of, you know, this is who God made me as. It's not a flaw. It's not a sin issue. And what my job is to do the best I can in those places where he's put me. And on the days where I feel like I'm dropping the ball, I just go back to that, like, she did what she could. I'm like, I'm just going to do what I can. So today it means cupcakes that I bought from Walmart. They're not homemade. Or I'm not publishing as much as other counterparts, like, because I feel that on the academic side of I'm not teaching as many courses extra, and I just got to do what I can in the place where I'm at.
And you just think, and I'm embracing the opportunities God has given me, and that's the most I can do, and he doesn't expect I don't think he expects anything more of me, and nobody else really does either, and if they do, that's kind of their deal.
Right. That's their baggage.
That's on them.
We don't need their stuff.
So you brought up a book. Are there any other resources that you all have found like helpful for either working through all these different pressures that we've been talking about yourself as a working mom, or that you would think, man, this would be really helpful if a pastor or a church kind of was aware of this and, it would help them support? Are there any resources that you guys have seen?
Maybe not specifically for working moms, which leads me to think maybe we need some of them.
I was trying to think of one too, and I was like, I don't know that there's one.
Caitlin Beatty has a book, A Woman's Place, which isn't specifically for working women, but it's probably a great book for all women who, feel called to do like motherhood and something else, because there's this idea that we were created to do things for the common good and to really contribute. I would say it'd probably be the basis of her book. As far as vocation, I think Bill Hendricks' book is great. I just got done reading that as well.
So good.
Gordon Smith has a lot of great books. Tom Nelson, Why We Work, if we want to discern kind of like, what am I called to do? Faith at Work movement, kind of the Timothy Keller. They've got a lot of these things you can actually find through the Hendricks Center.
You can. It so happens we have a Faith and Work page. Now that you mention it, I didn't bring it up.
So I think for discerning vocation, or how do I use my work towards building God's kingdom, that would be a great resource. I don't know, specifically for working moms or working mom guilt. Do you have any thoughts on that, Andi?
I don't know of any resources specifically geared towards working mom guilt, but I think about Brene Brown's resources, The Gifts of Imperfection, and talking more about from a global perspective of how do you deal with guilt and shame and vulnerability. I think that's a great launching pad for working through guilt and shame. And how as a community do we embrace one another so that we can really lean into the calling that the Lord has placed on our lives and support each other, not throw darts at each other and judge.
Yeah. And Brene is a working mom.
She is.
Worth pointing out.
Well, and really, you're right. And that part of it, the self-expectation, I think there's been quite a bit written, is something women just tend to put on themselves in general. And so, those kinds of resources would be helpful, even if you're personally applying it to the motherhood or track part of what your vocation is. So I'm hearing that it's to face these pressures, it's best to seek support from those around you, and not from those who might, pass judgment and seek to be a part of a community that is really on board with what you feel like the Lord has led you and your family to be doing, and for those people, that community of which we are even a part, it's not that working moms are just recipients and aren't giving as well, for those communities to really pitch in and help when they see a family that's just, struggling. And it doesn't have to be like things are coming unwound, but, and maybe having a sensitivity for dual working families, like, things are probably run on a pretty tight ship anyway. And if something happens, then it really... goes off the rails, and then really, and then finally just encouraging women in their vocation and where, and maybe even pointing out how they are helping the community and the society flourish, you know, particularly for women who find themselves in situations where they have to work and they don't necessarily want to be doing that, but they're doing it to provide for their family and for their children. And even pointing out, you know, if you're working at a fast food restaurant, which I have, you know, you're feeding people and you are actually helping working moms, and you are helping all of these people survive, because we eat at restaurants a lot, you know, and there are, and really seeking to support other working moms in all of those ways, you know, I think is the best way that we can all kind of
rally around each other.
Around each other. Yeah. I like that.
Yeah.
So I just want to thank Christina and Andi for being here. It was a lovely conversation on working moms, and thank you for listening.